I want to present an idea to you today. We live in a time where some things are being reversed and reconsidered. And so I thought it would be a good time for us as Easter people to follow in that tripartite thing that Paul gave us, in that faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And it's quoted 1 Corinthians 13:13 at every wedding pretty much that you ever go to. But we live in a time where some things are being reconsidered that I never thought would happen. For instance, just a couple months ago, if you didn't bring a reusable cloth bag to the grocery store, you were almost a bad person in Portland. And then I remember in March when all of a sudden they wouldn't allow them to be used at all. And that was quite a surprising reversal. And I thought, this is a very strange time we've entered into, where some things that I thought were assumed are being turned inside out and upside down. And so even the concept of love, I heard an amazing presentation that's saying how difficult it is in the time of COVID-19, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to distance yourself from somebody, and it's causing us to reconsider the very concept of love, and that we've almost inverted, because of our circumstances, our situation, what love looks like in this time in order to protect people because we treasure them, that we've had to distance ourselves from this, and there's something very counterintuitive about it. So I thought this would be a good time for us as a church, talking about faith. And last week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about hope. And for this week, to talk about love in maybe in a little bit different way than you've ever thought about it before. The original biblical language of Greek had so many different words that get translated into English as love. Some of you will know some of the famous words. I wrote a couple of them down to make sure. So you might know agape, eros, philia, from where we get Philadelphia, brotherly love, storge, mania, pragma, and ludus are just some examples of Greek words that all come into English as this L-O-V-E. And so there's a lot of different concepts that get tucked into love. And so I wrote this thing, and I rarely read for my sermons, but I wanted to make sure that I got this right. And so I wrote this thing down, and I wanted to read part of it for you. So we live in a time in our society where some feel emboldened in what I'm going to call unlove. It manifests in animosity, racism, and anti-immigrant sentiment. It's a sad development that what many of us had previously viewed as a time of progress and open-mindedness for acceptance and tolerance has come crashing down. In contrast to that, some of us that go to progressive churches like ours have become advocates for tolerance and justice issues. And we view this work as a type of love for the other. But I want to take this opportunity, as long as we're reevaluating things during this difficult time, to say that our notion of love for the other may be flawed and actually a little bit dangerous. So a common sentiment that I hear from caring liberal folks is this notion that they are just like us, except ... They're just like us, except they were born in a different country. They're just like us, except that they have a different skin color. They're just like us, except that they're attracted to people of a different sex. And this seems kind and caring on the surface, but there's a concerning misunderstanding underneath this seemingly open and accepting ideology. We need to be careful that we don't love other people because they're like us. Do you see the danger? When we love people because we imagine that they're just like us, except ... this is certainly better than our opponent's unlove or hatred, But as followers of Christ, we need to be clear, that's not exactly what love is. Love for others, because they're like us, concerns me, because what if it turns out that they're not actually like us? Will we still love them despite the difference? What if they value different things? What if they view the world very differently than we do? What if their goals and dreams deliver them to a different destination than we had hoped for? What if they have different priorities, or spend their money differently, or raise their children differently, or have different sexual appetites? Do we love only because we imagine that deep down they're exactly like us? This is a dangerous fiction and can actually be a disappointing fantasy. So this is why as Christians, we need to be careful and clear about who we love and why we love. 1 John 4 says this, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that God loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and God's love is made complete in us." So you can see clearly here, God did not love us because we were like God, but for the very opposite reason, because we were far from God. We were not like God. We did not prioritize what God did or value the things that God values. And this is love, not because of similarity, but exactly and precisely because of the difference between us. So this sentiment in our culture that says an enemy is just somebody whose story you haven't heard. It's as if to say that if you knew what made them tick and what they have been through in the past, you'd no longer be their enemy. But do you see the flaw here? My favorite philosopher, Zizek, points out the problem when he says, our problem with Hitler is not that we didn't know his story, because knowing someone's story doesn't make them any less your enemy. This is why Jesus calls us to not only love our neighbors as ourselves, and that's something as liberals that we pride ourselves on, but Jesus calls us to love our enemy and pray for those who persecute us. Love is not based on similarity, but on difference. This is where I like the G.K. Chesterton quote that says, "The gospel has not been tried and found difficult. It has been found difficult and left untried." So in contrast to the unlove with our anti-immigration sentiment, anti-gay rhetoric, and the legacy of racism in our country, we might view our liberal and open-minded acceptance and tolerance as a form of love. And it is a kind of love. But I want to be clear that that's not Christian love. Christian love is not rooted in similarity because deep down somebody is like us. The Spirit of Christ calls us, compels us, and empowers us to love across difference, and even to love those with whom we disagree. It calls us to love our enemy. Listen, if we love people because they're like us, we've done little more than the average Republican. Everyone loves people who are like themselves. Even lawyers do that. Sex workers do that. Elementary school teachers do that. Nurses do that. Everyone does that. No, we are called to a greater love. Not because deep down somebody's like us, but in spite the fact that they are different from us. This is the love of God that we're called to. It's a higher calling, and as long as we're in a time of global pause before we come out of this time of social distancing and stay-at-home restrictions, it's a great time for us to reflect and adjust our trajectory to see how we want to emerge out of this time. Let us be people of real love across difference, in spite of disagreement, even to those who might despise our work in the world. who undermine our convictions, and even those who seek to destroy the things we hold dear. As progressive types and liberals, we might be disappointed in the way the world is going, but that's exactly why love is so deeply needed in our time. I'm done talking, and now I am going to listen. What do you think?